Not have slides, but I'm going to encourage you to keep looking at these pictures. I am going to altogether switch gears for a moment and talk a little bit more about the donor perspective and the incentives that we find donor agencies articulate more generally in development assistance, but also very specifically in agricultural assistance. And I'm in fact just returning from a conference in BC at Georgetown University that brought together academics, applied researchers, and policymakers to discuss cutting-edge projects on health interventions, agricultural interventions, and the I think most stimulating part about this conference was that there is, and increasingly so, I believe, the demand across donor governments to actually produce more evidence-based research. So the centers of excellence are clearly more and more a focal point for donor agencies to connect with and try and integrate. Now, there still remain obstacles insofar as the knowledge that is generated may not necessarily lead to organizational learning, and I'm happy to engage in that discussion a little bit more in the Q&A, and it's an important one that the Deaton Institute is going to have to tackle as well, but that's the ultimate goal, right, of centers of excellence. Now, what's notable across the board is that foreign aid or foreign development assistance has become more inward focused, in the sense that donor governments feel increasingly pressured to convince taxpayers that the assistance is actually producing results. And a result or a consequence of that is that donors have a tendency to more and more strengthen initiatives that actually allow some sort of attribution. Okay, so the health area, vaccination initiatives, but also within agriculture there is a greater propensity now, if we look at the trend over time, that will say, and it's arguable whether it's scientifically even possible, that we'll try and say for $1 of American taxpayer money, we were able to reduce the infant mortality rate by X number of children or infants. Now the problem with that is, of course, that this kind of policy necessarily weakens any kind of capacity building initiative. Right? It's much less sexy to say that foreign aid contributed to the training of statisticians in the Ministry of Health than it is to show a picture of dying babies that then one can provide numbers that match the aid contribution with the outcomes. Now, within agriculture, we see a similar trend, focused more on the individuals. So the International Fertilizer Development Center is a very successful US-based institution. They do incredibly important work trying to help farmers increase their income through the distribution of improved fertilizing techniques. They are extremely successful in the budget allocation stage. In fact, the US Congress earmarks specifically for this organization because they're able to provide very good results. But I'm going to put on my hat as a political scientist, right, and someone who thinks of development more from a sustainable angle. And I'm going to argue that I still care about the farmer's individual decision-making process and how can we get them to change behavior, update based on information. But what matters critically are institutions, right? In the governance context in which farmers live, any kind of recipient of foreign aid lives. And while aid may, in the short run, boost income of farmers, it, by definition, does not have a sustainable component to it, right? Donor governments listen to fads. It used to be infrastructure and agriculture in the 70s, 80s. Everything shifted to health in the 1990s, early 2000s, and now we're back to infrastructure and agriculture, right? And so this obviously affects the sustainability of government programs. And so that's problematic. What I identify as an even greater problem is if one wants to go beyond just the small increase in income, but really push for commercialization of farming, so go beyond just the individual added income, you need to find mechanisms that reduce risk from investment, right? So even if fertilizing techniques can actually increase productivity, to make that next step and invest savings into more of a commercial enterprise, local governments need to set the seed, right? And does the local government or the states secure tenure and land use rights, right? Are water rights properly distributed? Or does the government implement fair policies, right? Corruption is a big problem there. And so the governance context is very important. And of course, the political context and political disruptions matter as well. And so there is a really strong position here that I would like to take, that yes, it's important to see how individual farmers tick, but without the governance context, it's really hard to go beyond to the next level. And in fact, as recently as 3 weeks ago, during his testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Nisha Biswal, who is the Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia, emphasized the importance of governance for the agricultural development context, very specifically anti-corruption, strengthening state institutions, and that's really a trend, right, that you can see across donors. But when we just look at U.S. foreign policy and how it's changed over time, that is really a new focus within Feed the Future, right? Under Dr. Shah as the former USAID administrator, or the Obama administration, they have increasingly pushed towards more engagement with public officials, more engagement with the state institutional context. And so even today, if we look at the state of U.S. agricultural aid, it is much more consistent with the way that the German government provides agricultural aid than it was before the presidential initiative. And so my research in general explores these different incentives across donor governments. I do like to focus on health and increasingly agriculture as a specific area, but what I wanted to do today, and I'm happy to talk more about it in the Q&As, is really to say that the institutional context matters, so any interdisciplinary research needs to understand the local leadership context, governance context, but also that donor governments, that the strategies that they pursue vary quite markedly across the board. And so understanding their incentive systems and their structures is also important in designing and proposing initiatives to the benefit of the small farmer, smallholder farmer. Thank you.